Well, good morning. I'm coming to you on the 12th of October, 2022, with a update on Ukraine. And I'm very happy to say that Kherson is back in Ukrainian hands. I guess I predicted it 2 weeks ago, so it was 2 weeks too early. But it is clear now that Kherson has been liberated from the Russian invader. And here are some pictures of what the Russians did on the way out. And it's not clear yet how many Russian soldiers were left behind. There are reports that they were able to evacuate most of their troops, but that perhaps several thousand are still behind, caught on the northern bank of the Dnipro River. If that's the case, the Ukrainians should video their capture and basically show the world that the Russians have failed once again in their stated objectives and that they are misleading, as they always are, in their statements concerning the war. I just want to turn to the Institute for Study of War and just mention some of the things here. As you can see, Ukrainian troops made major territorial gains throughout Kherson Oblast on November 11th and will continue consolidating control of the Western Bank in the coming days. The Ukrainians moved very, very quickly in that last 24 hours when the Russians were still claiming to have evacuated most of their troops, so that the claims that the Russians made that there was no equipment left behind and that no soldier was left behind, these are patently untrue. There's enough footage on the internet to show that Ukrainians have captured a great deal of Russian hardware, Russian ammunition, and the last order reportedly, the last order was given by the Russian commanders to their soldiers were to don civilian clothing and run for it. As a result, there might have been, or probably have been, many units left behind. We shall see in the next few days. Russian mill bloggers can ridicule the Russians' MOD statements about the Russian withdrawal to the left bank, and but generally took a much more muted stance concerning Ukrainian gains. This is interesting, but again, it builds up on the criticism that the Kremlin has received over the last several months concerning the incompetence of their military operation. This is going to erode Putin's standing in the Kremlin. Although I think that the narrative that this is a religious war, that this is a war against Satan, that this is a war to establish Russia's place in the world, that this is a war to vindicate Russia's view of itself as the Third Rome, a kind of unique state, given a very important religious and political mission. To stand against Western liberal values, eroding traditional supports of society. I think that still plays well in Russia, at least in certain sectors, perhaps not as well in Moscow and St. Petersburg as it does in the hinterland, but nonetheless, there's still significant support. Although the last few polls, the one poll by the supposedly independent polling service, the last independent polling service in Russia indicates that support for the war is slipping, and that it has begun to slip even more precipitously after the partial mobilization called for by Vladimir Putin. This gives us hope that within a year or so, I think it will take about a year, that Putin's position will be sufficiently eroded so that he will be retired and replaced by someone who will understand the dynamics of the war, although that is not clear because of many of those around Putin, the Siloviki, the strongmen, share in this kind of delusional view of the world. and therefore it is not clear that somebody like Patrushev or although I don't think Prigozhin has a chance of replacing Medvedev, will take a more conciliatory stance, except to say that once they're faced with stark defeats, and I think that the Ukrainians will keep pushing, perhaps a renewed offensive during the winter from the Zaporizhia region will ultimately cut off the Russian troops still on the Kherson Oblast and threaten, as they can already threaten from Kherson, the supply lines to Crimea. So that may convince the Russians that their position is untenable and they may decide to retreat. Recent calls for negotiations, I think, are premature. And the only way that I can see any kind of negotiation, even under US pressure, given the view from Kyiv that this war can be won and that at some point during the war, Putin will be removed, which is a disconnect from the view in many Western capitals, although that view has been eroded somewhat by Ukrainian military victories. I think the only chance for negotiations would be something like Putin agrees to leave all territory occupied since February 23 and agrees to leave territory in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions while securing some kind of Hong Kong-like agreement to hold on to Crimea, and perhaps some kind of internationally guaranteed referenda that really sees how the populace in those areas feels concerning either belonging to Ukraine or Russia. But certainly an evacuation of all territories conquered since February 23rd. I think an evacuation of Luhansk and Donetsk, and some kind of negotiated settlement in Crimea, some type of Hong Kong arrangement, if you will. But I think this has to be accompanied by a admission, fast-track admission of Ukraine into NATO. Without that, I don't think Zelensky can cover any type of negotiation with Putin, as about 93% of the Ukrainian populace, according to polls, believe that they can drive out the Russians from all their territory. And I think that without that kind of framework, I think Zelensky would be foolish to engage in negotiations at this time. And I think that if Putin is smart, he will offer this type of framework. Even then, I think if Ukraine continues to win major victories on the battlefield, it will be very difficult to negotiate from a Ukrainian standpoint, unless pressured by allies with significant cutoffs of military wherewithal. I don't think that is politically viable, certainly not in the United States, and I don't think viable in Europe, given the obvious aggression that the Russians are engaged in. Just to continue, I'd like to show you a little bit of Ukrainian celebrations in Kherson, which give lie to the Russian argument that 87% of the populace voted for annexation. As you can see, it's fairly clear that the Ukrainians are very happy to see Ukrainian armed forces back in Kherson, and this clearly belies the false narrative that Kherson is Russian. Kherson is Ukraine. It's a very clear situation there. Um, I also like to show you, just to close out, the rage that exists in Russia, and I think the increasing awareness that their military situation is growing untenable, perhaps hopeless. This is Vladimir Volosyev, and he is a principal Kremlin propagandist, and you see the rage in him. It's unbelievable what these people have spouted. Criminal, absolutely criminal. They're insane. But it almost feels good, German Schadenfreude, to see the Russians just thrash around hopelessly to find some kind of explanation, biting their own tails. Oi, oi is right. I can tell them in the pockets of Russian officials. Just to kind of give you a sense of our costs, um, if you divide the amounts that we've given Ukraine into the total population of the United States, then it's less than $5. I think this is a very good investment, not to have our own troops fighting in Poland, in the Baltic states, in the eastern flank of NATO. So I leave you now with this Slava Ukraine, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. And if you like this program, please subscribe and please comment on it. I appreciate any criticism or any comments that come in. I will read them all. Okay, well, until next time.